back on Born Before 64 with classical archaeologist Fran and Bernie Alpert on Born Before 64. And these are some questions that either fact or myth. And Fran, I'd like to ask you the question, what evidence do we have that Israelites were actually in Egypt?
Okay, I don't think there's any great evidence of any kind. In other words, we certainly didn't find Moses in the bulrushes, his basket. But the only piece of evidence, which is ironic, is dates from about the year 1250 before the Common Era. And it's a large stone tablet which mentions the name Israel, just the name Israel, as if it's a separate group of people. And it was carved by an emperor who obviously was on the warpath, because it says, "We have met Israel and they are defeated." Now, the interesting thing about Egyptian pharaohs is everything is a victory, nothing is a defeat. So that's the time frame that most people would agree is the Exodus.
Okay,
that's not the kind of evidence. You need more than
that. And
the Tanakh, before we get going, the Tanakh tells us, the Bible tells us, that there were 603,550 men above the age of 20 who were in the Exodus. Now that does not include their wives, their children, their cousins, their aunts, everyone else, the thousands of flocks of sheep and cattle, and rams and goats and everything else that they were taking, and all of the hanger-oners that came with them from Egypt. It would have been well over 2 million people that would have had to made the Exodus from Israel, that what we talk about on Passover. It's impossible that the desert, the Sinai desert, would be able to support them. There is not enough water. Aerial photography shows us that this would be an impossibility for that number of people. That would be the size of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem
combined.
Almost, yes, combined. That would
so
leave
could there
Goshen.
have been just a few people that could have gone or anything?
There could have been. Yes,
there could have been.
There probably were.
And they exaggerated a little bit, you know?
Yes, they know.
I think that's really a very logical thing, because later, within 200 years, we begin to see a coalescence of these various groups.
Yes.
Who filter into the land of Canaan, and they become part of the population that's already there, the Canaanites. So perhaps the Israelites and the Canaanites blend together, and that means, in fact, that from about 1200, we are the indigenous people. We are the people who have been there for the last 3,200 years. So
that's a big statement politically as well.
Really?
But just backsliding a little bit, if we didn't have an Exodus, then we didn't have a revelation at Mount Sinai.
That's the truth.
Okay,
Yeah.
So what happened? I went to Mount Sinai in 1967, and there are, I think, 38 stops in the Bible that claim that the wandering Israelites stayed at along the way. Only 2 of them can be identified. The others we can't even identify. Only 2 stops. There is not one shard. We're talking about from 2.5 million people. We would have huge garbage dumps, being in the desert for 40 years, had they entered the desert or even gone to Mount Sinai. Not one single shard. And if you put a piece of pottery in the ground today and you take it out 2,000 years from now, it will look exactly the same as the day you put it in.
Wow.
And another thing, that Sinai is not a sand desert, it's a stone desert.
It's a stone desert, so it would have been even harder for them to get across.
Well, it's not only harder, but the remains would have been more. I mean, it didn't have the sand dunes to blow and what have you.
away or to obscure the tracks or anything.
All aerial photography shows that there is no such thing. I mean, if one drives today with a Jeep across, you could come back 2,000 years and see the tracks that Jeep made. Well, certainly 2.5 million people would have left
Some sort
remain.
of.
Yes. So how do we say? What do we say about the Ten Commandments, which were given on Mount Sinai.
Don't tell me you're going to tell me there were no commandments.
No, I'm not
there
going to. There are commandments.
But they're moral and ethical ways to live. And
Right.
the Bible is a guide to living.
Right.
It's not.
But there's no
more than
evidence
one way.
of there's no evidence of the tablets.
No.
Oh, no.
No.
But
No,
that's,
there's-
that's, even the most religious person would agree with that.
Well, they
Now-
were in the tabernacle supposedly.
Right.
And of
That's
course,
another whole issue.
That's a whole issue. 6 chapters in the Bible, and we have absolute. First of all, the architecture that is described, it would have been impossible to make in the desert. Okay, the tribes that accompanied it, the smoke pillar in front that led the people in the back, it just could not have happened the way it was written. And Mount Sinai, that we went up to, would not support that many people as well. Of course, the tourist guide pointed out the burning bush, you know.
There was no burning bush
God,
either.
Yeah, but God, you know, Revelation
There's
comes.
a plant called the burning bush.
Right. The Revelation comes in more than one way at Sinai. You know, every day I wake up in the morning and it's a revelation.
It's a
you know.
revelation. Well, tell me, did Joshua actually fight the battle for Jericho?
Well, Joshua, it's hard to even say. He was more of a transition after Moses was unable to enter the land. Okay, he gave it over to Joshua, and Joshua informed his people that in 3 days, now in 3 days he's going to get 2 million people to move across into Canaan and defeat Canaan. Which is just impossible. First of all, they didn't have that kind of army, or you just can't, you couldn't have done it. The other thing is that it lists 28 cities and 3 cities of refuge that he came into to conquer. In 1967, there was a huge survey done in Israel. Over 250 archaeologists, students, volunteers participated. And they were able to survey all of the 4 tribal areas, that is Benjamin, Judah, Ephraim, and Manasseh, those 4 areas which were the centrality of Canaan, okay? And they were able to distinguish the Israelite settlements, which were higher up than the Canaanite settlement.
So then my next question is, the monarchy is portrayed as a large enterprise in the biblical narrative. Is this archaeologically correct?
Oh, here we go again. Here we go again. Saul was appointed by Samuel the prophet because the people wanted a king. And he informed them, he said, you shouldn't have a king. A king is only going to tax you, you know, and make you go into the army. You shouldn't really have a king. But the Israelites said, no, they want a king just like the other nations around them. So Samuel appoints Saul to be the first king. Well, it didn't last very long. The Philistines came at that time. This was in the 12th century that the Philistines came to Israel. The Philistines are the sea people, okay? And they came and took part of the land on the shore, which today would be approximately where Gaza is, Ashkelon, Ashdod, that whole sea coast area. And he went to battle with them, Saul, and he was killed at that time. And then David, who befriended Saul by playing his harp, this is all from the Bible, by playing his harp in his chambers, was one reason why maybe he became king. Another reason was that he was a warrior. You know the old story of David and Goliath, okay? Mm-hmm. Although the Bible tells us it was Elkanah who actually killed, not David. So
and on that note,
yeah.
We have to take a short break.
Okay.
And we'll be right back with
Okay.
the last couple of questions, and we're going to get to see the most beautiful pieces that you have in the collection.